Welcome, everyone. I am Nicole Dement, Executive Director at SOLA. SOLA stands for Support of Old Lady Artists, and we are so delighted to have Norie Sato speak tonight for our September community call. Norie is an incredible artist that many of you already know and love, and she enriches both public spaces and her studio practice. She has created a wide range of individual, collaborative, and design team public art projects, along with various public art plans for projects of all sizes, as we'll experience tonight, one very large one to come. Her process begins with the site itself, and she draws on its context that inspire these ideas, and then she takes that form. They take a form in a way that enhances the environment. Her work is known for adding depth and a distinct Norie touch to the built world. And like many of you in the Pacific Northwest or who have lived here before, I encountered her public art years ago through these striking green and black tall spires at the Link light rail facility off of I-5. They beautifully evoke this field of horsetail grass. I don't know if you've seen that one. That is one of many, and her work spans an impressive range of spaces across the US with transit systems, airports, libraries, roadways, city halls, convention centers, and parks from San Francisco, Ames, Iowa, Madison, Wisconsin, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Miami, among others. And she's been honored with numerous awards, including the Washington State Governor's Art Award and the Public Art Network Leadership Award. And we at SOLA are thrilled to have her as part of the SOLA community, where she was recognized with the SOLA Award in 2018. So tonight, Norie will talk about her work at San Francisco's wastewater treatment plant Headworks project. And this large-scale public art project began, I think, in 2016. We're about to find out all about it. But that gives you an idea of potentially how long these things take. And I hear that it has started the final process of installation. So Norie, welcome, and thank you so much for sharing more about this project today.
Well, thanks everyone for attending and listening to my talk. I thought it would be interesting to go through this project kind of from beginning to where it is now, which is almost completed in installation, actually. Partly because it is a complicated project and it went through lots of ins and outs, and it really, I think, tells a story of how public art projects can go well, but also it can also, that the end result is always really, you don't always see kind of what goes into it. And so I thought that it might be interesting to hear some of that, and that I can kind of tell you a little bit more of the backstory that you wouldn't necessarily see just by looking at the artwork itself. So I will share my screen. Let's see. Okay. You are looking just at a grid of artwork projects that I've done over the years, and they are quite varied, as you can see. And so this type of work is not something, this particular project isn't something that I do all the time. It is something that I have just was lucky enough to be selected for. It's interesting right now because when I was first selected for this project in 2016, I went for the interview in San Francisco the day after Trump was elected. And so I was in such a tiz. Everybody was in this like, what is happening kind of mode, as we all were then. But it was something that now, because we're in this 8 years later time frame, just kind of goes to show how long these things go. And so it seemed appropriate to bring it up this particular moment. So this is a project that was made for a not very glamorous scenario. It's a wastewater treatment plant that treats over 80% of the wastewater sewage of San Francisco. So it's a really big, huge facility. They are trying to update it because it was getting old, but they couldn't stop the facility. So a lot of the reason why it took so long is because they had to keep the plant operating while they were doing the work to upgrade it. And my piece is actually the exterior wall or a fence, you might say, of this facility. And they couldn't leave it unfenced for too long, but then they couldn't leave the old fence up. So it was a very interesting timing scenario. So I don't know how many of you know San Francisco very much, but this is just a map of San Francisco. And this little red dot, can you see my cursor? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. This little red dot kind of shows where it is. It's in the Hunter Bayview neighborhood, and it is at, for those of you who want to know specifically where it is, it's at the corner of Evans Avenue and Rankin and kind of near 3rd Street, and there's a light rail that runs along 3rd Street. So the Hunter Bayview neighborhood, Hunter's Point is where they did a lot of shipbuilding. And Bayview is where a lot of the workers were housed who lived and worked in the shipyards. So it's a neighborhood that is not very wealthy and is in what I guess one would say transition right now. So one of the first things I do when I get selected for a project is I go around the neighborhood and the site where it is, and I look at all the various things and I look at what things are, thinking what about these sites could I use as some part of the work or some inspiration for the work, and what strikes me about the particular neighborhood. So here are just a bunch of images from around the neighborhood. There are a lot of houses, these kind of typical San Francisco row houses, a lot of gates in front of everybody's house that has these weird, aluminum curlicues and various patterns. It's got some small industrial kind of business things. It's got some really cool shops and restaurants. So it's a typical neighborhood that is very diverse, I guess you could say. And so, I'm thinking, what can I do that would use some of these elements? And this woman that you're seeing here, her name was Joy, and she was one of my tour guides, and she took me around the neighborhood to show me various aspects of the neighborhood as well. I loved her profile. I thought it was so fantastic. So this is the original site that I was given. So you can kind of see in this image that it is this isn't the entire site. This is just a corner. This street right here is Evans. This is a little kind of dead-end street called Rankin. And so at this corner, I think that they had scoped out this area that I might make a screen for the facility that would be kind of artful, I guess you could say. So, this is sort of what they said was the site. And when I looked at it, I studied it and I looked at what had been suggested by the architects. So these are all architects' drawings. And they had suggested, the art thing right here. But they had also suggested other fence treatments along along Evans to kind of divide up what was happening behind the wall itself. So then I went and got a tour of the facility, and it's not all pretty. as you can imagine, there's a lot of sludge that goes through. You'd be surprised what they get in their wastewater sewage treatment. See these green pipes right here? These green pipes are where all the sludge and everything comes into the facility. So this is right at the entry point for whatever that people put into their sewage, into the drains. Lots of pipes, lots of pools of water, just a lot of equipment. It's just, it's not really a lovely facility. It's very, very practical. And so they bring it in, they take out all the solid stuff, that is floating around. Then they take what's left, the sludge, and then they kind of put it into this roller scenario, which sort of helps solidify and separate out the sludge. And then eventually they end up with some dirty water that they put in various pools, which then cleans the water. And eventually they take the cleanest water, once they so-called clean it, and put it into San Francisco Bay. So it's really taking, everything and trying to make the water clean enough to go into the bay. So, that's part of the really fun part of working on these projects, is you really get the behind the scenes look at whatever is happening in these facilities. And it's fascinating, actually. So then I thought, well, I'm really interested in that process of how the water is treated, and that process is interesting, and people should know what goes on behind the fence, and it would be nice to be able to show it more. And just working on the corner did not seem adequate. This is the corner. And so I thought, well, I must try to come up with a way that I could make an artwork that would be quasi-transparent, that you can kind of see that there was a lot of pipe that went through here, that it was a serious facility. So I discovered, while I was doing my research on various things, Zahner Company's headquarters building, where they had worked on these systems that involve fins and flat panels. And I thought, wow, I bet this would be a pretty interesting way of working on a fence to create a certain amount of dimension. And so I talked to them and went to visit them. They're based in Kansas City, to see whether I could get the way they work and the way they do their work, to work with this particular project. Now, Zahner is a very big company, as it turns out. I didn't realize it when I was just doing all this research, but they do facades for buildings. They, in fact, did the MOPOP, the EMP facade that we have here in Seattle Center, but they've also done museums, and they do stadiums, they do, Google headquarters. I mean, they really do huge facade projects. So I was really very happy that they were willing to work with me, little old me, on this project. Although this project this project isn't that small. It's actually almost 250 feet long and 30 feet wide. So it's not a small project, but in any case, I was happy that they would be willing to work with like an artist versus like a huge architectural firm or something.
Norie, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So in the previous slide, you said that, the proposal was for the bottom,
This corner area, yeah.
Corner. And so you just said, no, I need to make a bigger project. So you just proposed something much bigger.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I was thinking that I didn't want to this is the secret. I didn't really like what the architects had come up with. I thought it was really boring and not very transparent. I wanted people to be able to see through it. And it seemed weird that I would have a small piece that just butted up against their work. And I thought that the lines between my work and their work would be not very visible. You wouldn't be able to tell. And I didn't want to be part of their work too much anyway. And I love architects, and I don't mind working with them, but sometimes when they come up with these ideas and they say art goes here, it's not always what we think makes sense. So I really thought it would be good to do this entire wall. So this is it. It's actually goes around the corner, but this is where the corner is. This is the entire wall flattened out. And it goes from input all the way over to this area right here, which is a building, solid building, that's called the grit tank, which is where they take all the solids and out and put them into, stuff that they can put into trash. They send it trucks and, so because it was a solid area, it just made sense that I would take this entire open area. So that's what I did.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a little secret about applying for public art projects.
Yeah, well, you try to push the envelope if you can. Some people, some projects will go for it. Other projects are like, nope, stay in your lane.
Yeah, well, good for you.
So, we always try. No, they were happy. They said, okay, go for it. And then we'll decide. Once we see your proposal, we'll decide. So then I was like, I'm really interested in the community. And so what I did was when I was on my tour in the community with Joy here, I thought, oh, it'd be really great to take portraits of the community and put them into the artwork. And, have a whole bunch of people. It's a very long wall. It would reflect the community. And I could do a whole abstraction with people and their faces, really showing that the community is really an important part of this facility as well. So I really got into this whole idea of these two layers. One is a perforated image layer, and then the other is a three-dimensional layer. Somebody had a question. Is that you, Nicole?
I was just going to interrupt. Public art projects are so community driven. It's great to have community, but who gets to decide? How do you pick who goes on?
I guess, I would pick. And I would just pick a cross section of people from ages to, types and different kinds of profiles, and as interesting as I could find. And so here, those are the photos that I had that have been kind of patternized in a perforated pattern. And here they are, again, working with this sort of perforated system and looking at the portraits, and they become kind of abstract in a way, but they also, you can kind of tell there are people there. And it's not really meant to be, I recognize that person, that's my brother or whatever. It's really meant to just sort of be using community folks specifically, but also in a much more kind of abstracted way. And then the way the Zaner system works is that you can kind of take these images and not only make perforation patterns out of them, but they have a way that they do these fins that kind of reflect the image behind. Now, these are very, very low resolution. They don't have a lot of detail to them. And so it becomes kind of abstract in a way, but you can kind of see I was working with the various, the length of the wall, and kind of working with the fins that are coming out and the images, and they sort of reflect each other in a way. Very difficult to depict something that's this long in a flat way, that's, because there's a certain dimensionality to it as well. So I made this proposal, and it got rejected.
Oh,
I know. It's always disappointing when that happens, because I thought it was a pretty good idea. But the reason is, and it was kind of not a very good reason, I didn't think, but I didn't push back probably as hard as I should have. But the Public Utilities Commission, who owns this wastewater treatment plant, they said, well, we have another facility that's very community oriented, and we don't want this project to have that community orientation, which is sort of backwards from the way a lot of public artworks work. They said, we really would like you to think about, really reveal the process of what goes on in the facility itself, like what is happening in the facility. So it would be more visible to the public, which I completely also supported, because that was one of my desires, is to make the artwork be more transparent. So I said, okay. And so I decided to do another concept. It's sad to be rejected, but oh well, forge along here.
Is that pretty typical, though, that you propose something and then they negotiate or work with you? It's not. Okay.
No, not that typical.
Okay.
But it has happened in the past, because one of the things about public art that makes it interesting, I think, is that there's this back and forth kind of discussion that goes along between so many people, the community, the agency, the artists, the Arts Commission. There's a lot of people that are part of this whole facility. And so one of the things I like to do is to be in conversation with all of that. And so for me to just say no is not really my style. I think, okay, I can come up with another idea. No problem. So another thing that I've always loved is the way water moves, and how it becomes a kind of reflection, not only of water, but also of wind and a lot of physical forces that happen in the world. And so I thought, okay, what I would be interested in doing is to take this idea of in and out and kind of swirling through the system and coming out clean. So you start dirty, swirl it through the system, and then it comes in out clean. So I worked a lot with this idea of vortices and water movement of various kinds. And so I came up with several different ways that we could do that. And so I thought, okay, could it do it this way? Could do it that way? So I came up with some ideas of how I thought we could work using the Zahner system, using one layer, using two layers of, just sort of conceptualizing how it could be. Could I make certain funnel shapes come out much more into 3 dimensions? And, there was just a lot of different ways of looking at it. So finally, I settled on this, which is a 2-layer system. One that has a layer of perforated images that reflect that vortex idea and the water swirling through, with the 3-dimensional fins kind of reflecting that image. And so that's sort of what I decided was my second idea. And then, adding to all of this is that there are realities, what's possible, what fits within the budget, all these things that I'm also thinking about. And so the sky is not always like, hey, whatever you want to do it. There are always so many constraints that goes on here. And one of the constraints was I could only stick out 15 inches maximum from the surface of the wall. And so I had all these 3, different ideas about things. But anyway, there was just a lot of logistics about that, rules. And part of the wall had to be solid because people worked behind there and they didn't want to be seen. I always think it'd be great to do something transparent, but it turns out the people who work behind her don't actually want to be seen. So, there's just a lot of things that actually, in the end, drive the design. So these are some of the earlier parts. I couldn't use the fins on this part because I couldn't stick out at all because the wall was already at the outer edge of the property line. So I could really only use the fins on this section of the wall, when one would just look at the project and say, why didn't you go around the corner with the fins? Well, the reason is because there wasn't any space. There's a railroad track that goes by here, and the trains would have bumped into something if I had stuck out at all. So, it was just one of those things where I just could not do what I really wanted to do. But I think in the end, you'll see, it looks pretty good. So, here are some iterations of the fins, kind of following in a very big way the vortex image. These are various ways I looked at it. And then I was trying to present it to the Arts Commission and everything, and they decided that the way I could draw it, which was this, was not understandable enough, and so that I probably should get it rendered. Well, I'm not a renderer. And so they were nice enough to hire some architects who rendered the project for me, but they went completely wild in the rendering and not at all rendered it in a way that was real and close to what I was able to do. So here are a couple of their renderings, but you can kind of see it just went completely wild there. This is also a bit wild, but closer to reality. And so on the basis of this and some of these other images is what I went for the approval of the second. Well, it was probably the second approval of the second concept. So initially I kind of talked to people about what I was going to do, and they said, great, now we have to show it to, more people, and they need to understand it more. So you have to render it. So anyway, this is the second iteration, which helps. It shows the scale. It shows that there will be some color. The holes are a lot bigger than, not quite to scale, but in any case, it gives a better idea of what the artwork will be like. So then I kind of had to take my drawings and put it into SketchUp, into the architect's SketchUp, and make it on the, put it on the wall. But here you can see I was still hoping that I could move the fins around the corner. I said, oh, maybe we can come out just, 3 inches for it. That's before I got the, sorry, can't do that. But this is, another iteration of how the proposal developed. And you can kind of see that it's complicated. It just keeps morphing because there's so many factors to take into consideration. And here are some of the drawings that I had to work with the structural engineers, because we had to make sure that the wall will stand up. And so we don't want the wall falling down. And so, and there were constraints there. And then I discovered that there was going to be a big concrete wall underneath it that I didn't know was going to exist. So all these things, for some reason, you think you get all the information, but then they're like, oh, by the way. So this is sort of what happened. And oh, by the way, there's going to be a lot of conduit behind the wall, not just the big pipes. So it's going to be kind of messy back there. It's like, oh, really? And then it's like, oh, by the way, there's a slope. We forgot to tell you about the slope. And so just a lot of interesting things that come up. So these processes do take a while. And you can see they say, okay, this is it, 1 foot to 2.5 inches. It has to be a certain way. And anyway, so there's a lot of working back and forth.
How much does the structural engineer dictate what you do? Or important, obviously, for it to stand and not fall. It's a public art project, but Should
But
someone be prepared to completely revise a project based on structural engineering?
yeah, sometimes you just have to, you
Mm.
know. Yes, I'm used to working with structural engineers because otherwise I can't get the things to stand up. This is a very tall wall. It's 30 feet. And so it's not just something you put up like a fence, like a picket fence or something. It has to have a lot of structure or else it won't stand up. And what's behind it is really very delicate. I mean, they're huge pipes. They're like 4-foot diameter pipes, but they're still, you can't have the wall falling over on it. They need to be secure. People can't shoot at the pipes, and there's a lot of stuff that has to go with it. So it's an artwork on one hand, but it's also very functional. And so there are a lot of functional requirements that the artwork has to fulfill. And so it's that balance of how do I make something look delicate enough, even though it's like super, super strong. And so I had to have them, the project was building all these structural steel, vertical and horizontal things, structure behind the wall that would hold it up. And the structural engineers had to design all of that. And then I put my panels on top of it. So these are just some structural engineer drawings. And I'm like, no, can we do the, like, oh, I don't know. Do I have to stop here? And then they're like, oh, by the way, there's a jog in the wall. We forgot to tell you about that. Things like that. So I started writing. I'm a terrible, I don't know how artists are in making their drawings, but I finally had to learn SketchUp to a certain level. So I used Between, which is a program that's supposed to be really easy to use, but is actually for me really hard. And so I finally learned how to take the drawings that the architect sent me and the fabricators sent me and try to put color on them and stuff like that. I've gotten to the point where I can point a color at the fin and color the fins to my level. But so I didn't actually draw all these. The fabricators and the architects were very helpful in helping me do this. And one of the things this shows is that I was really interested because it's kind of a drive-by artwork, that the colors are different from one direction to the other direction. So they shift in one direction. So when you drive one way, you see kind of one sequence, and then when you drive the other way, you see a different sequence of colors. So the fins are double-sided, and I was also, because of budget, limited to 16 colors that I had to make work in both directions. And so this kind of is showing how it would work in 16 colors. And I didn't want a rainbow kind of look. I wanted it to be a little more random than just like a rainbow. So I kind of worked on these colors so that it's dark more on this side, which is dirty, and becomes lighter on this side, which is clean. So the colors have kind of a reason for being as well. And this is much more true to what the final one ended up with, no fins on this angled part and then colored fins on this side. And then just here's some other drawings that come from SketchUp, which shows sort of what's possible, what I think maybe the artwork will look like when it's finished. All right. Hey, approved. And now I'm going to fabricate it. And one of the things that is really great for me about working with the fabricators that I selected to work with is that they have a system that they work with. It's customized for this particular project on one level, but they have a way of working that translates sort of my drawings into the computer, into their computers. They kind of massage it, And then it basically, they push a button and then these machines make the artwork. You know, there aren't like men or people back in the shop cutting the fins out with a saw or anything like that. It's all mechanized. So on one level, it made it possible for me to do this big project for, I can't say relatively cheap. It wasn't cheap at all, but it was, you know, a way to make it possible, I guess, and feasible. Because in the end, there were like 130 fins and I don't know how many panels, stuff like that. So here's just a look at the colors that I picked for the fins.
We do have a question about the budget in case you
Oh,
willing to share.
I'll talk about the budget at the end because it was kind of, it was a thing. Anyway, so one of the first things we did was make a mock-up, a full-scale mock-up to make sure that all the decisions or most of the decisions we made worked, that the wall stood up, that it looked good, there weren't any surprises, blah, blah, blah. So here's the setup. So it's got 5 sets of fins and 4 sets of panels. And there are 3 panels on they're each like 10 feet high, roughly. And then this solid area is a solid concrete wall that the wall sits not on top of. It doesn't depend on the wall at all, the concrete, to hold it, but it stands, it's right, like, it looks like it sits on top or sits slightly in front of the concrete wall. But you can kind of see what it looks like. It's a series of perforations, and then this area that's solid, had to be solid so the workers weren't exposed, are bumps. So the bump outs are in the same pattern, really, as they continue the whorl pattern, but you can see the way the piece comes together, the fins and everything. So one thing I discovered is that, and it's a kind of funny thing, is that even though the fins are painted, they're not actually all painted. Only the part that's outside the panels, in front of the panels, are painted. There's a whole back side of the structure, like right here, that's just primer on the aluminum. And I realized when I was looking at it that you can actually see through it and see more of the back than I thought you could see. Because when I was making the drawings, I was only really worried about what was in front of the panels. And then I'm like, oh, gee, there's a lot of that yellow primer that shows. Anyway, here's a little video that I'm going to show you of the piece as we put it up and looked at it and walked around it. And you can really see the scale of it. That's me there. And how tall it is. And, you know, we try to imagine these things in our brain, but sometimes can't. And, you know, I was really happy at the way the sun kind of shifted around during the course of the day and went through the panels onto the fins. They don't actually in the real scenario because of what's behind it and stuff like that. But it was kind of a fun surprise. So we're all kind of looking at it and, oops, sorry. Oops. So then I tried to figure out the painting scenario after I learned about, oh, I have to have it more painted. And so I decided that the top above the panels had to be, because some of the fins emerge above, so they needed to be painted, the whole thing. But the other parts, I couldn't afford to paint all the fins, every inch of it. So I tried to get them to do what I called overspray, like they spray these. So can't you just overspray? So anybody who's sprayed anything, you know that there's always a lot of overspray. if you don't mask things out. So I was like, can you just do a lot of extra overspray? So I could, so they could do it without costing me too much money. And then here we are, they're fabricating it in the shop. That's the machine that punches out the panels. You can kind of see how the holes in this particular panel, the holes in the bumps kind of interact, which I think is pretty cool. And then this is the fins before they're all put together with their structures. And here are the panels are not flat. They are bent on the edges, so they become rigid, but it's sort of a panelized system that they can hang on the structure of the wall. And so when they install it, they just go, bloop, they can hang it, which is kind of cool. And then these are parts of the structure that were also had to be fabricated. And then here the panels are, they're just, this is before they're bent. But then, you know, I went to the painters and I was watching the guys painting and everything. And I'm like, more overspray, more overspray. So this is how the things worked. And because they're different colors, one color is on one side and the other color is on the other side, it took 2 rounds through the painting booth and things like that. So it took a bit of work for the painters also to paint the fins. And then here they all are packaged up, ready to get on the truck to go to San Francisco. Then there was a delay. And so it had to sit in storage for a couple years. So finally in 2023, they started to install it. And here it is. Here's the site with the big the wall that was there is gone. And you can kind of see it is gone. Here's the railroad tracks I was telling you about. And then here it is where the structure is being installed on the, so there are some heavier duty steel structure, and then there's an aluminum frame that gets put on top. So these are the steel structures. And then you can kind of see the horizontal aluminum frame that gets put on the verticals. And then these tabs come out that hold the panels, and they're starting to be installed. The fins are being installed first. And here they install all the fins. And then they install the panels. So the panels being installed. This one they skipped because we had to remake a panel because there are these pipes that are sticking out, fire pipes, that we were like, oh, I guess we didn't know about those pipes. So they had to remake the panel here. So even after you try to take care of everything, there are these things that happen that are unexpected. And you can kind of see there are 2 layers of panel here, but you can kind of see the spray painting, the overspray at the top, and why I thought it was important for the tops to be painted, but you can't really see through it that much, actually. So we ignore those parts now. Here it is, mostly installed on site. It's either installing the whole, the panels on the corner. This was the area that they told me was going to be the artwork initially. I just took it all the way back around the corner. This is it from below. I thought it looked a lot like the SketchUp image, if you want to know the truth. I was kind of surprised by that, but anyway. And then here it is, virtually all installed. It's actually not, the site isn't ready. So the fence and everything is still up. So even though this was in February, it's still, the site is not quite done. So I don't have any real like final photographs of it. They were washing the panels, that's why they're wet here.
Do you have a final date?
Not yet. I know. They have to make the sidewalk also. There's a sidewalk and street trees and all this kind of work too, which they couldn't do until other things were done. They've now got, they had to make these end panels to measure. So in this particular moment, they're not quite done yet. We have to
Yeah.
redesign these end panels actually,
This is
because
incredible, Norie. I mean, it's so beautiful. It's so interesting to hear how this process, oh my gosh, is what Kathleen is saying. What an amazing project. Work of art. It is so impressive. Thank you
yeah.
for. So SketchUp was the main software program that you used. We have a question about what kind of software did you use? I
Well,
think.
I worked a lot with, yes, I had to learn SketchUp for this project. Um, but I depended a lot on SketchUp work by the architects and the fabricator. So
Mhm.
I'd say, oh, can you send me that file in SketchUp? So I could put it in and I could do. So I can't say that I work well in SketchUp. That is not, it's, for me, it's not intuitive, but it is a easier form than CAD, for instance.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to translate the image into the, patterns. That was all done by Zahner's software. So in a way, it was friendly for me. And I'd say, oh, can't you make this a little bit different? And they're like, nope, you have to send an image. So I would have to like send them another image where I made certain parts darker, and the darker parts became more where the dots are more opaque, and the open parts are more like white. So I worked with a black and white grayscale image, but it was very, very few, not very many steps of gray, you might say, in between white and black.
You have some wonderful comments in the chat, but we have just about 5 minutes left. So I wanted to just a general question: if someone were interested in getting into public art or maybe just starting out, what advice do you have for them?
I don't think it's for everyone. And I think it's better to start with a project that you feel you can manage, that's small enough. And maybe the scope is not so expansive, because a lot of this can really drive you crazy. There's so many things to have to pay attention to. I would say start small and start with something that you know, just to get used to working in that scenario, because it's not at all like working in the studio. There's so many decisions that need to be made, and you have to have so many approvals, so many people get their hands on it, and then all these things are like, oh yeah, by the way, we forgot to tell you about this. You can't hang it the way you said you were going to hang. I mean, there's all these things that keep coming up, that you have to be able to be kind of quick on your feet about things and say, okay, well, ooh, how are we going to do that? And can you help me? And, that kind of thing. So,
Thank you for that. Um, just a few minutes more, and I do have a question here from June. Thank you, June. Once you get a commission, I feel there's not enough time for the conceptualization part of the process, and you have to stick to the design once it's approved. What are the most problematic parts of the process to you?
I think what happens is that one needs to always have a really good communications line with your project manager and the people who are managing the construction side of the project, because things happen and then they make you still keep your idea. They say, hey, by the way, we've changed all this stuff and now you have to keep everything the same. And then you have to say, no, I can't do that. You have to be, and you don't want to be like the grumpy artist all the time, even though I'm grumpy in private. I try to be smiley in public and say, oh, that sounds very difficult. And I have changed the ideas significantly, not just been forced to change the ideas. but have changed the ideas from my side. Oh, I think I'll do it this way. And then, I just always keep them informed and say, okay, I'm going to change this, or it's going to change to this. And then you can find out whether they'll say, no, I'm sorry, you can't change that. We have to keep it, or it's okay if you change it, or we understand the reason for changing it, whatever. But it is really, you can imagine I came up with this idea in probably the conceptualization was 2017, 2018, pretty much all the approval processes and everything. It crept into 29, but we started fabricating it in let's see, we did the mock-up right before the pandemic, so 2019, like December 2019, I think is when we did the mock-up.
So you were 3 years in the proposal and the design process.
Right.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
And even at the mock-up, they were details, but we changed things after the mock-up, like, oh yeah, we should do this, and oh yeah, we need to do that. So there's always an evolution of the artwork, and that's why I don't like to do these projects where you send them, you're like a competition or something where you send in a proposal and they pick your proposal, and then you're like, uh-oh, I don't know enough about the project to really be able to stick to the proposal. And so then that's when the discussion and conversation really needs to begin. But some of these, I'd say that the agencies and people who are used to working in public art and who have a good history of public art, they're very, very interactive, and they're understanding of all these things that need to happen. But sometimes when you work with private developers or with people who aren't in the, they haven't had a lot of experience commissioning artwork, they are the hardest ones to work with, because they think you have to stick with your idea no matter what sometimes. And it just is not possible. It just isn't,
Yeah. So flexibility and patience are two key personality types.
I know. And then sometimes the process goes awry. Like Saya had, I know she had some projects where, the process, not our fault, but it's just the various process of moving through the system and people changing and approvals and, politicians and everything. They get in the way of really some of these smooth processes. They do. Actually, I could tell you so many stories, but I learned this trick actually from architects. Hi, Greg. And that is when the architects say, you say, how about this idea, or how about this idea? And if they say, well, we'll think about it, that means, are you kidding? There's no way it's going to happen. And so I learned that trick. And so when somebody says we're going to, so I learned it too. I think, oh yeah, well, I'll think about that. But I think to myself, no, I'm not going to do that. But anyway, it's a little trick that I learned. And it's been very helpful, because it gives you time also without being grumpy and being mean,
Oh my goodness. There are moments when I bet some grumpy meanness is appropriate. So
yes.
Thank you so much for all of this and spilling the tea about the whole process with us. Thank you so much, Norie. It's such a pleasure to work with you in all the ways, and congratulations on this upcoming final project. Is there anything else that we can look forward to for you, or where can we find more about what you're up to?
Well, I guess my website, www.noriesato.com. Thank you so much for being patient.
I also want to recognize and honor the Duwamish people that we are on the land of in Seattle, and encourage you all to just make sure that you know who was on the lands where you're at. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening.